Secular feminists have critiqued Christianity for perpetuating purity culture, a social context that defines women's worth by their sexual histories, by whether they have remained sexually pure or not. These critiques have some merit. I certainly grew up in a Christian context that placed an inordinate amount of emphasis on sexual purity and used shaming tactics to keep young people from having sex. While on the surface, purity culture might seem to be in line with the Christian worldview, it is actually a harmful distortion. Let's look at the conflation of purity with virginity. In the culture I was raised in, these terms were used synonymously, which creates a reductive and often destructive understanding of purity. If purity is simply shorthand for whether or not one has had sex, then our default state is purity, which can then be corrupted or lost through sexual activity. The trajectory is from purity into corruption, and then you are more or less marooned there. Virginity, once lost, can never truly be regained. There are two major problems with this. First, this understanding of purity inverts the arc of the Christian life, in which we move from original sin and into sanctification by grace. The movement is from corruption toward purity. Purity, rightly and holistically understood, is the conversion of the whole self, which is a gradual and lifelong process, only possible through divine grace. This process of purification includes how we steward our sexuality, but is not reducible to it. An inverted understanding of sin and purity leads to the second major problem: seeing women and girls who've lost their virginity as damaged goods. That's the logic here. If purity is synonymous with virginity, it's something that you either have or you don't. It can be lost and never regained. Having sex outside of marriage is not just a lapse in behavior that can be repented and repaired. It reflects a change of status, a shift in one's being that is permanent. While Christian purity culture might be a reaction against the hypersexualization of our culture, in a great twist of irony, it actually leads to the sexualization of girls by rooting their identity and value in sexuality and creating a subclass of women who have lost their value. We need to make a shift from purity to chastity. Chastity refers to the rightful stewarding of one's sexual desires. Chastity is not something you have and then you lose. It is a virtue that is continually developed and strengthened. Virtues are attributes that we build over time through the cultivation of habits, ways of thinking and acting that become ingrained in our character with effort and God's help. Chastity is not a passive state, but an active practice. Purity, in the reductive sense, tends to apply only to the unmarried, but everyone is called to practice the virtue of chastity, no matter one's state of life. Stewarding one's sexual desires is just as important within marriage as it is outside of it. Let's teach girls that they have innate worth that cannot be lost. Let's teach girls that they have reason, understanding, and strength of will, that they are capable of cultivating the full range of virtues, including chastity. Let's teach them to avoid the extremes in our culture, the sex-on-demand paradigm on the one hand, and purity culture on the other. Both of these extremes disregard women's personal dignity and the universal call to lifelong conversion.